Hello, everybody. I'm Tina Brown. I'm the guest curator for this year's festival. And this is a session I care enormously about. In fact, it was one of the first things that I was determined to make sure made it onto the Aspen agenda, because as a lifelong journalist, married to a celebrated editor all my life, obviously journalism runs through my veins. You know, it is the blood in my veins. So I care enormously about the subject, and I'm so happy to see such a full room, because clearly you do too. So for over a decade now, social media has been a fact-free cesspool, flowing across borders, polluting minds indiscriminately. But despite that, if there's one phrase that I reject out of hand, it's the post-truth society. It's just defeatist. And it's an oxymoron anyway, because the basis of civil society and of democracy itself, which is contingent on informed citizens, especially in election years, is factual information about our governments, our corporations, our courts, the list goes on. And now, AI puts the tool of disinformation in anyone's hands. For about $100, you can now pay a website developer to build an AI-powered, self-running website that spews fake news, as Steve Brill writes in his wonderful new book, The Death of Truth. So this morning, we're going to hear from distinguished journalists and editors about what serious journalism can and is doing to bring us the truth, the undiluted, unbiased truth about what happened and why. Dean Baquet, the brilliant former top editor of the New York Times, who ran that newsroom from 2014 to 2022, he now leads the Times Investigative Reporting Fellowship, where he works with reporters doing local accountability journalism. Cece Way, editor-in-chief of The Markup, a non-profit news site focused on the impact of technology on society. She's a trailblazer in digital journalism whose career includes roles at ProPublica, where she oversaw Pulitzer Prize-winning investigations. Theo Baker, who just finished his sophomore year at Stanford, where as a student journalist for the Stanford Daily, his dogged investigative reporting toppled the university president over fraudulence in his scientific research. What a killer student, right? This reporting earned Theo the George Polk Award, making him the youngest recipient, he was just 18 years old, in the award's history. He's also snagged a book deal, so we can, not worry anymore about Theo Baker. And Steve Brill, co-CEO of NewsGuard, a website that tracks online disinformation, and his book, The Death of Truth, as I mentioned, explores how facts can be restored to power. And leading the discussion is my good friend, the Dynamo Reuters editor-in-chief, Alessandra Galloni. So come up, panel, and welcome.
Thank you, Tina. So we've been told to speak very loudly. So those of you in the front, I apologize if we're spitting out at you. So it is a great pleasure for me to be here to talk about sort of one of the scourges of our time, which is the ocean of misinformation and disinformation that we are all drowning in. But I thought, this is such a big topic that I thought we could start by sort of focusing our minds on something very real. Tonight we're all going to be watching the debate between President Biden and Donald Trump, and of course, in just a few months, we're going to have a very, very consequential election around which much of the fears and the possible solutions about misinformation and disinformation could coalesce. So I thought just to get us warmed up, we can then sort of branch out. But to get us started, I wanted to ask each of you if you could give us a very pithy answer to the question, what worries you the most ahead of these consequential elections? We'll just go from left to right. Steve.
Sure, I'll give one example that we've outlined at NewsGuard in a recent report, which is the odds are now better than 50-50. That if you go online and think you're reading a local news website in the United States, you are reading a hoax website that has been financed either by political action committees on the left or on the right, or there's a new entrant in the sweepstakes, and that is the Russian disinformation network. They have launched just recently a 157 new local news sites that are attempting to promote all varieties of disinformation, and you can only imagine what you're going to see on those sites beginning during the debate, right after the debate. They, for example, last week, they promoted a news story on these local news sites that the Secret Service had discovered that when the FBI served the subpoena at Mar-a-Lago on President Trump, they secretly planted wiretaps all over Mar-a-Lago so that the FBI could keep track of everything the former president was saying. You're going to see a zillion stories like that.
Theo?
Yeah, so I actually ended up working for the Election Integrity Partnership during the midterm elections. This is a nonpartisan research group that specifically studies misinformation and disinformation around elections. And what was really interesting about that was figuring out just how siloed people are from each other. Right now, people consume news in a very passive way. They're fed news via algorithm. They're not seeking it out themselves. And not only are they consuming news that may or may not have the same quality guidelines that a traditional news organization might have, but even the guardrails that we used to have are dissipating. The Election Integrity Partnership, which worked on the 2020 election and the 2022 election, has just been disbanded because too many legal fees from the Project Veritas types. Similar thing happened with Twitter's trust and safety team. So not only is disinformation going to get a lot worse with these AI tools, but our guardrails for addressing them are already diminished.
Cece?
I feel like I'm worried about something that's even more basic, which is access. And what I mean by that is access, one, to the internet. There is a credit that a lot of Americans use in order to afford internet that is going away at this vital moment in time. But then also, even if you have access to the internet, having access to information that you can understand is a big barrier in a lot of communities, and ties into what Theo said too, which is some communities just don't consume their information in English.
We'll come back to that, Cece. In fact, Dean.
So there's a lot. Can you hear me? There's a lot. But I guess the single most shocking thing is the sheer number of Americans who believe that Donald Trump won the election, which if you that in and of itself is obviously ludicrous and has been proven false. But what does that do to the future of the integrity of elections? What does it do to, the same cry that Trump used is going to be used in local elections around the country, but that's the the underpinning of the whole election process, the underpinning of politics is that you believe that there's a system of integrity. Somebody wins, somebody loses, whether you like it or not. The person who loses concedes, the person who wins takes office. And I think what we've seen in the last couple of years is just a profound denial of that sort of basic American political strategy.
So I think the four answers really frame the conversation sort of more widely, right? Sort of the crazy stuff that is out there. Do we have the guardrails? Maybe it's not even about all that, but is it simply access and different kinds of access? And then, of course, sort of the respect and integrity of institutions writ large. And I think that sort of frames the conversation for all the other topics we're going to discuss. So, Steve, I want to start with you because, of course, you've just, or you're about to publish, or it's out. I'm not sure if it's out.
Yeah.
It's out. You just published a book on the death of truth. And in this, you say that without belief in a common set of facts, we cannot expect a civil society. So it sounds like I was about to ask you, are we seeing that play out already? It seems the answer is yes. Well, how then?
Well, we've seen it play out, but to come back to the point that Dean made, one of the themes of the book is that everything has become your opinion versus my opinion, including who got the most votes.
Right.
And we used to trust people who were counting votes, not to have some secret agenda, but to count the votes. And if you can't trust that, then where is your political system going to go? If you can't trust Dr. Fauci, but instead get your information from crazy websites, healthcare websites that will sell you fruit pits to cure your cancer and that have more engagement online than the Mayo Clinic does. If you can't trust those experts, where does your healthcare go? If you can't trust brand names not to be selling you products that are deliberately deficient, or if you can't trust the idea that Target is actually not selling satanic-themed clothing, which is one of the latest online themes, what happens to our system of free enterprise and commerce? So it's all a matter of everything is now an opinion, including who got the most votes. And it's not simply a matter of opinion this evening of who won the debate. It's going to be a matter of opinion of half the things that the candidates say. Some people are going to say, well, in my opinion, Trump actually did win the election. Or in my opinion, Joe Biden orchestrated the prosecution in New York.
I want to come to you, Dean, on this issue of opinion. But since you've mentioned a couple now, what is the craziest stuff that is out there right now? Just give us a sense. I mean, so we can...
Well, actually, I was looking through one page in my book before I came over here, and I couldn't help myself when I was doing the book. I took 1 2-week period from last June and just looked at all the stuff that NewsGuard had spotted and put into its catalog of all the false narratives that are out there. We have a running catalog, and a couple of them included, there were 286 of them just in 2 weeks, and they had to be like really significant stuff. So I wrote down, one is that the American family farms are about to be confiscated because of environmental reasons, and we don't want people in the meat industry. So that's the end of the family farm. Another is that Budweiser is run by a CIA agent. Another was, and you've all heard this one, Michelle Obama is transgender. Another one is that vaccines have been found, and this was reported in a medical journal that does not exist, but it's quoted, that vaccines have been found not only to do all the other bad things, but they've just discovered that it's the prime source for multiple sclerosis. And last but not least, a video of Judge Eileen Cannon, the judge in South Florida who is thought, probably rightly so, to be more pro-Trump than not. It's a video of her appearing and waving a Trump banner at a Trump rally, which is totally fake.
Right. Okay. Dean, let's come back to this issue of facts. I mean, the New York Times prided itself for, many, many years on fact-based journalism, on, reporting the facts. But at a time when it is possible to find any version of the facts, any version of the truth that you want or that you look for, how does the mainstream media uphold this mission? Is it possible?
First off, it's extraordinarily difficult. But first off, I do think that we have to make sure to understand that it can't all be the job of the press. I mean, as narcissistic as we can be in the press, there's a lot to be done. There's education, public officials. There's a lot that needs to be done. But I think what we're going to have to do, first off, is to be radically transparent about our stories, radically transparent about our writers. I mean, in the world of journalism I grew up starting in the, believe it or not, in the 1970s, you were a little bit arrogant about the reader. You figured that, look, it's here, it's in the New Orleans States item where I started. You know it's true, screw you if you don't believe it. I think we can't do that anymore. I think we're going to have to, I admire Steve's site, and I think, which is sort of, in a way, radically transparent. It sort of goes through almost like a textbook. And I think we're going to have to do that too. And the press has already started to do some of that. We have more to do. We show what reporters look like. We show videos of reporters describing their stories and how they did their stories. We're much more, we work a lot harder to show the work. And the other thing I think we can do more of, and we've done, but look, there's a lot of work to do. This is sort of a relatively recent phenomenon. I do think we need to put reporting back at the center of journalism. And that's not about opinion versus the non-opinion side of a news organization. whether it's whatever side of the house it's on. I do think we've sort of moved a little bit too far away from the most important thing journalism does is to report. And reporting is, my spectrum of reporting is broad. It's to bear witness. It's to go to places and witness stuff and bring the stories back home. It's also the most sophisticated investigative reporting. But I do think that we're going to have to remind people that what we do with some humility, and humility should also compel us to admit sometimes we screw up, that what we're going to do with some humility is put reporting at the center. Reporting is what matters the most. And even the best opinion, and I'm not talking about the kind of opinion Steve's talking about, but even the best opinion has got to be grounded in reporting. And I think we just have to yank that back to the center of American journalism.
I think we'll come back to the issue of transparency. I just want to press you a little bit on what you're saying is in particular for the most controversial issues, Gaza, abortion. That the gap between what the New York Times does or what Reuters does or other media organizations does and what you see on your phones and on social media is so wide that what you're describing becomes harder to convince.
But I'm also not just talking about the most controversial stories, and I'm not just talking about like the top 5, whether it's Gaza or election denialism, et cetera. I'm talking about, in the last couple of years in my new gig, I've spent a lot of time in local newsrooms, and they have their own versions of this, right? They have their own versions of, the Mississippi Today, which is this terrific new news organization, Jackson, Mississippi, is under pretty relentless attack by the former governor, who's not attacking them for any facts in the series of stories they ran. He's just attacking them on sort of general principle. And they have their own versions of that. So, and I would say the same thing to them. You have to be humble. You have to admit when you get it wrong. You have to lay your facts out in an almost academic way. And some of that, by the way, is going to involve new kinds of technology. Some of that is, I grew up in a world where you weren't able to show a video of a reporter saying, "Hi, my name is Dean Baquet. I did this story by working on it for 3 months. Here are the 5 records I pulled." You almost are going to have to go into some kinds of stories with the point of view that you're not just presenting your facts. You're actually going to have to convince some of your audience. You're going to have to work really hard to look very different than what Steve describes.
Just a quick another quick follow-up, which is you've talked about what you are teaching the local journalists that you're working with. What have they taught you? What has working with local journalism taught you?
A lot. First off, it's interesting. Their newsrooms don't have the same kind of... sometimes I think the more important your newsroom, the more you're likely to spend time looking at your navel. And I find that these small startup news organizations don't. They're much more experimental. They're much more willing to try stuff. The bigger newsrooms, it took a long time for the New York Times to sort of get comfortable doing things differently. These 5-person newsrooms like, New York Focus, which is probably 10 people now, they try stuff. They go in and say, okay, we're not going to write a story the way the New York Times has always written it because, we don't have to do it that way. But the most important thing I've learned from them is they really understand that they're going to only win, and in their case, win means survive, by working for their audience to trust them. They're much more audience-focused. The traditional news organizations of America grew up, and until maybe a decade ago, were focused on advertising, which is a very different way to sort of think about building a news organization. They are very focused on audience. And that relentless focus on audience, and frankly, the humility, which I could have used a dose of humility, I've learned a lot from them.
So on audience, I want to bring you in, Theo. One of the things that I was surprised in some of the conversations that you've had sort of over the past few months, of course, because as we said, Theo was the youngest winner of the George Polk Award ever for his investigations at Stanford. But one thing that struck me is you said that your generation, how easily vulnerable your generation is to misinformation, which to me was a shock because I thought you grew up on your phones. Surely you're savvy. So talk us through how actually you're so vulnerable to it.
Yeah, in some ways, I think journalism has disregarded the pressing threat of young people to a certain extent. It really is an ecosystem that is very challenging to find, good fact-based journalism. People my age are not seeking out journalism. They still consume news, except they don't consume it from people who are putting in the effort, putting in the time to do it in a rigorous, fair way. And often journalism's distribution models are failing to actually reach young audiences. A lot of times, mainstream media organizations do incredible reporting, and then it's cribbed by random people talking over a green screen, I can't say that word, on TikTok. I think one of the issues is that the understanding of what journalism constitutes has sort of fallen out of vogue. There is not as much belief in journalism as a public service, in the need for unbiased, rigorous, independent journalism. And people just aren't consuming it. I remember running a training at the Stanford Daily, which is, I guess, essentially a hyperlocal newspaper. And I was talking to our beat reporters, so our senior reporters, and I was going around and I asked them, what is the best article you read this week? It doesn't matter where it's from. And more than half of them told me, our beat reporters, that they hadn't read a single article in the prior week. And there's this misunderstanding about the role of journalism and what it means and the flow of information. We just had one of the news managing editors of the Stanford Daily participate in a takeover of the president's office. And to me, that says a lot about where journalism is going to have issues going forward with the people inside the industry and with how people from the outside perceive the role of journalism.
Let me press a little bit. Is the issue, do you think, that because as you say, young people consume news. Is it a format issue? Is it that sort of the traditional media needs to be savvier about the way they get to it? Is it the types of content that we're producing? What is it that would get to your audience more effectively?
I mean, to be blunt, I go to Stanford, which is a great university with a lot of smart people, and I would be surprised if more than 50% of the student body had read a single news article in the last year. In the last year.
Okay, we're going to pause there for a second. We'll pause there. Dean and Steve, and then I'm going to go to Cece on another. Yeah.
Boy, that's worse than I thought. So what's my reaction to that?
Yeah. I think we can see it, but yeah, articulate it.
Look, I mean, I guess one of the reasons I ended up where I'm sort of hopeful. So here's what I think. I think we're going to have to figure out where those students get their news, and I think we're going to have to go there. And wherever that is, we're going to have to go there with our standards. I'm not saying we're going to, but I think we're going to have to go there. I think we built a world, and it was very effective, and it allowed us to survive for a long time. We built a world in which everybody came to us. And we're now in a world we're going to have to, I want to know whether students get whatever information they have, and I want to go there because, frankly, we serve them, and we need to figure out what they read. And again, I'm not saying that we do it in a way where we toss aside the things that I think make American journalism at its best special, but I think we got to go there.
Steve, quick reaction?
Well, I had one reaction, which is that your 50% number, and I'm not going to ask you to answer this because you'd have to brag about yourself, but I guarantee that number was higher for the articles you wrote about the president of the university.
Absolutely not.
Well,
Sorry.
But I bet it was. I bet Steve's right. I bet it was higher, even if they didn't read your articles.
Yeah,
they knew
they
about.
Knew it had the
That's
impact.
right.
But that's exactly to the point of the distribution.
One of the things that always interests me, I teach a journalism seminar at Yale, and half of the kids who are in it are people on the Yale Daily News, and to me that is the ideal journalism environment because you have a total monopoly. You're the only local newspaper in that locale, and yet the students there I am invariably yelling at them that they need to take advantage of the leverage they have and do the kind of reporting that you did. For example, the president of Yale had some rule for a while that whoever had the beat of the president of Yale, whoever had that beat at the Yale Daily News, had to submit interview questions in advance, 4 or 5 days in advance, and then the interview would be off the record. And I said to these kids, I said, are you out of your mind? Don't do that. And they said, well, we won't have access to the president. I said, well, yes, you will, because you will put a little thing at the top of the front page of the newspaper and on the home page, and you will count down the number of days in which the president of the university has refused to talk to you. And by the third day, there's going to be someone at the New York Times who also went to Yale who's going to pick up that story. And they're going to say, well, that's a pretty cute story. Let's run that. And by the fourth day, I guarantee you, Peter Salovey's going to have you over for lunch, and it's all going to be on the record. And they did some version of that, and that's what happened. But one of the issues, I think, is we need to train a student journalist, not you. It's obviously in your genes for good reasons. But we need to train student journalists to understand that if they're in a college newspaper environment, they've got all the leverage. They should use it, in a humble way. They should use it in a respectful way. They shouldn't take advantage of it. But my God, the administration has to talk to them.
Yeah.
They're in a great place.
Right.
Cece, I want to come to you, and we've been talking about audiences, and you mentioned access, which is so important, and we're going to talk about with you a different kind of access.
Yeah.
Talk us through the work that you have done in translations for communities that are not consuming news in English, because we've been talking about sort of a very monolithic audience, that is getting duped in English. And to a certain extent, we've been talking about kind of sophisticated AI tools, but actually your work is on simple translation and how much could go wrong. So tell us a little bit about that and how it's been important in getting close to those audiences.
Yeah, so I'll give everybody an example that I think is very, very tangible that you can sort of really grab onto. Something that we discovered in the last year or so and really focused on was the fact that in immigrant communities in the United States, where the primary language is not English, English is secondary, there have been, and it's unique to each community, but I'll go specifically to the Vietnamese community in Oakland, California. There's little to no access to information about sort of their local area, right? So there's really great Vietnamese language information, but if it's about Oakland, if it's about California, it's actually filtered primarily through a single YouTube influencer who translates Breitbart into Vietnamese, right? So that's where they're getting the majority of their information. However, we should not all be depressed immediately. What's interesting is that when we talked to the community members, they knew something was up, right? So it wasn't like they just believed everything that was said to them, but because they had no other access to information and they wanted local news, they watched it with sort of a grain of salt, but they didn't know sort of where to actually transform what they were actually listening to. And so something that we did was we, one, reported on this phenomenon and tried to quantify like how much of all of their media consumption was actually news, and it was over 50%, so at least that's exciting. But then what we did was we actually just went in and we did workshops and we created resources for them based exactly on what they actually told us they needed. So we taught them how to use Google Translate. We showed them different places that they could get news in a way, and then what do they need in order to make it accessible to them. But then the most inspiring thing is actually when we found the 80-year-old Vietnamese grandmother who took it upon herself, because she saw this problem. She took it upon herself and she said, I can't let this stand. I will personally try to translate articles from the New York Times, from the Atlantic, and just post it to my Facebook feed. And we did a whole oral history with her on her journey doing this and what it meant. And it got to a point where a YouTube channel then wanted her to broadcast her translations out loud as opposed to putting them on Facebook. And she literally, this was so amazing. She literally does it at like midnight, holding her grandchild while they're sleeping. And then she doesn't know how to use editing software. So if she messes up her take, she starts all over again. But then she puts the video up. And it was incredible because so many people in the community, even throughout our reporting process, some of them knew about it already. Some of them knew who she was and what she was doing. They didn't all agree with her, right? But there was this clear sense in the community that we need information, so we're going to get it however we can, but we also need to do something about this. And so for us, it's really about how do you actually get on the ground as journalists, and then how do you think about the information we are providing as something that is actually transformative for people in some way, and how can we do that quickly and responsively?
did the fact that she was from the community, with her grandchild, or did it make her more credible? Because credibility is a key issue of this, right?
So that made her more
are you more
credible.
credible to the person who you relate to, or are you more credible, or do you think the New York Times was more credible?
Right. So she was definitely seen as more credible, not only because people physically interacted with her, right, and maybe would see her at a community gathering once a month. But the other thing that we did in this case is that we also made sure that our reporter is also from the Vietnamese community. And she was second generation. She had an uncle who is getting access to information in a very similar way. And what we started doing after this, and I think this is an evolution in journalism that goes maybe back and forth throughout different periods of history, where there are periods in journalism in which journalists are not encouraged to report on things that personally affect them, right? Because it may skew how they do it, or they may have certain sort of predetermined viewpoints. And yet, in this particular instance, and what we've been really leaning into, is that we've actually asked freelancers from various communities, if your community is experiencing misinformation, pitch us on how you would actually report on it. Because it gives them that credibility of, I understand what everyone here is going through, but also I'm trying to do something that is productive and helpful, right? And then it's on them and our ability to sort of coach reporters to make sure that their reporting process is solid and how they're going about it is solid.
I mean, thus far, I think we have, certain strands that are in common, right? Sort of, audiences getting close to your audiences, finding almost ambassadors sort of for your brand, for the, fact-based brand, to sort of shore up your credibility. Let me jump now to sort of the tools. You touched upon it, simple tools, Google Translate. But what about, one that I want to ask you, Cece, is audio deepfakes. The audio deepfakes are now seeming like one of the most dangerous tools that are out there. And of course, there was the political consultant in New Hampshire who was charged with voter suppression, right, because of sort of the impersonation of the candidate over using an AI-generated, basically like the robocalls, the President Biden robocalls.
Yeah.
So this is really hard to detect, right? I mean, video is easier. So what tools are out there and who's using them best to try to tackle this?
Okay, this is a really great question. So I would say I have two different types of answers to this, right? The best tool is teaching people how to be skeptical. And what I mean by that is, like many years ago when I taught my mom, if you get an email asking you for your bank account number, you should forward it to me first, and I'll tell you whether or not it's real. Because she did actually genuinely fill it out once, right? And so then we went through the process of changing every single password and calling her bank. But that experience allowed her to sort of detect something. She doesn't need to understand the intricacies of it. She just needs to have a flag go up saying, let me just check that this is real or not. But then on the technology side, right, I think whether it's audio deepfakes, I think video deepfakes are also getting harder to parse, depending on the sophistication of the person creating it. The most promising tools that I have seen are ones that make it not possible to replicate I would say like a paper trail of where the actual photo, audio, et cetera, was taken from and on what device. But beyond that, I actually, I think the hardest thing is that I feel like media literacy is the best tool, but it is also the hardest thing to convince people that they don't already have.
I mean, this goes back to your education issue, but Steve, what tools have you seen actually that can help?
Well, our overall tool, which is our browser extension, where if you use it, and Microsoft has licensed it so that all of its the people who use Edge can and do use it. Whenever you see a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed or do a Google search, our point score will come up next to any URL that we've rated, and we've rated all the news and information sites responsible for 95% of online engagement in the places where we operate. But that's Microsoft. That's not Facebook. It's not Google. It's not Twitter, because their business model, it turns out, is to feed you the most inflammatory stuff. So we thought we were solving a problem for them. We thought we were solving a bug in their system. What we were solving was the primary business feature of their system. Having said that, news literacy, we have all kinds of news literacy tools. We have agreements with 600 library systems around the world that use our browser extension for all the computers that people access in libraries because they don't have access on their own to the internet. But I have a fear that just the term news literacy is about to become the sister of anti-wokeism, that's going to be the next battle, because we have an agreement, for example, with the teachers' unions, which I have a long history of being an adversary of, so I'm not exactly a lapdog of Randy Weingarten, but we have an agreement with them because we believe in news literacy and they do, but we have been attacked by the same Republicans in the House that shut down your operation at Stanford for news literacy, because what's news literacy to them? If we say that a website that says that Hank Aaron and Colin Powell and name any celebrity died from a COVID vaccine, and we say that's a lie, their view is no, that's just the opinion of that website, and you don't want to suppress their free speech. And if you teach kids news literacy, you're teaching them not to believe that Hank Aaron died from a COVID vaccine. And you're damn right we're teaching them that.
What is the role, I mean, we talked a bit about the tools, but what is the roles, bad actors who are disseminating misinformation can't be relied on to disclose the fact that they're bad actors, right? And their AI use that is being used for this. And so AI companies, to a certain extent, it is incumbent upon them to ensure that this transparency. What are the AI platforms doing? And what, if they're not, what should they be doing?
Unintentionally, they're doing the opposite right now, because one of the ironies is that the high-quality publishing companies, many of them, including the Times, I think Reuters, have decided that you can't use our stuff for free. So they have made it impossible for ChatGPT, for example, to crawl the New York Times to get information. The way generative AI works is they will crawl everything. So if they're not using the reliable publishing sources, they're using the unreliable ones, because Sputnik and RT and all the 600 Russian propaganda sites, they're fine with ChatGPT crawling them. So as a result, for example, if you do a prompt on ChatGPT, are NATO troops fighting in Ukraine? They're not. The only websites that have written stories about NATO troops fighting in Ukraine are the only websites that ChatGPT will be consulting in its LLM, and they will spit out the answer that NATO troops are fighting in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Theo, I think the views of us in a certain generation, feel that, the AI companies are responsible, the social media platforms are responsible. I mean, what's your view? I mean, is it up to these companies to be transparent, to put in guardrails? Who should put in the guardrails? Maybe you have a different view.
It's a really hard question to answer, and a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I have spent a lot of time on it. Social media definitely has a responsibility, in my opinion, to be helping news sites actually deliver quality content. We've seen AI companies like Perplexity straight up crib stories from various news organizations, especially Forbes and Wired. We have seen, Facebook absolutely pull the plug on BuzzFeed, effectively killing the platform. The problem is, and I use the 50% number, which is sort of a giant claim, and it is in some ways particular to Stanford because there has long been a culture of disregarding journalism there. But it's true of almost all young people that the news that they consume is not coming from newspapers. Even if the reporting is still coming from the newspapers, it's filtered. It's on campus, it's coming through the anonymous social media sites. For tech, it's coming through Hacker News, the Y Combinator site, or Reddit. And for Gaza war information, it's coming from TikTok or Instagram infographics. Dean, your point about reaching people where they are is incredibly important, because the people who are currently getting the most engagement with what is the largest demographic in the US and will continue to be, a powerful force for decades to come, these are not people who have the same rigorous standards as journalists do. And social media has absolutely, enabled people to fall very quickly into, wormholes that they can't escape from.
The people who, can I ask a question?
Please, yeah.
The people who understood what you reported at Stanford, but didn't read the original story, as the question Steve raised, do you have a handle on where they got the news?
The campus social media sites, rumors, talking with... How many people in this room have heard of blinds? I mean, raise your hand. At least one person. That's good.
Is that good or bad that only one?
Yeah, tell us.
Should we have that person taken out of the room?
Tell us why you asked that question.
Blinds are something that have basically overtaken a lot of younger people. They're anonymous rumors. They come from literally nothing. Often they're about celebrities, like Taylor Swift especially, and people just take them as fact. They see anonymous people posting things on the internet oftentimes as more credible than some news organizations. And I know that's a crazy thing to say, and I know some people won't believe it just because it is crazy. And yet that has absolutely been my experience at Stanford. My job is literally to talk to people all day. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of students and faculty and alums, and I'm trying to get a sense of, what is to come for an industry that I will be in for decades to come. And it's really dire. It really is.
Well, I'm so glad you're staying in this industry.
Yeah.
That's a good note. Now, Dean, go, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A.
All I was going to say is it would be of such value. It would almost be a story. If it would be a story. If you could take the original story about the president and actually try to figure out by talking to students and backtracking on social media, how do people learn about it? Mm-hmm. You would learn a couple of things. First, you would have an interesting story about how people get credible information. Secondly, as a journalist, you'd have another sort of set of tools for where to go to make sure they see your stuff, right? If you find out that 20% of the people who know about your reporting got it from over here, like when you break the next big story, you want to make sure you go over there before anybody else does. Anyway.
Okay, opening up for questions. All right, I'm going to go in order that they went up. On the my far left. And no, that gentleman next to you, and then you, and then here.
Okay, on the point of question everything, could y'all talk about vetting out stories that the public could do if somebody sees something in any one of these news sources? Just kind of a process of vetting a story out, and how we can kind of verify our own facts and verify what's there.
Great question. Why don't we have two at a time, because we don't have much time.
Thanks. This has been fascinating. Part of the issue that hasn't been addressed as much is the extent to which this is an issue of human behavior. Because in the presence of a piece of information, it's about what that person believes, thinks, does. Do they forward it? Do they not? Do they believe it? Or do they have an emotional reaction to it? I'm at the American Psychological Association. We've identified exactly what the tactics are that make missions so believable, that make us in a subcortical response way respond to it differently than the cortical New York Times kinds of reports. Is there interest within the journalism community in disseminating some of these tricks that are used to teach individuals, kind of like was being said before, these are where you should have a red flag come up. If you see this, it might be misinformation. You should change your emotions, response, behavior to it.
Great.
Any interest?
Let's get the mic over here, but answer the question. Vetting, I don't know, Dean, do you want to?
I bet the first one is better for Steve.
That's what we
Steve,
try to
yes,
do.
yeah.
That is, I needed a little bit of Google Translate to understand your question, but that is what we try to do. And it depends on, a lot of it is common sense. If you see a story that says, why are you going to your oncologist? He's just trying to rip you off. If you buy this subscription for colloidal silver or apricot pits, you'll be fine. Only certain people would be predisposed to believe that, but unfortunately, those people are people, A, they're desperate because they have cancer. B, the American healthcare system has really disoriented and estranged a vast majority of people because they don't have access to doctors, they don't have access to insurance, so it might be out of that kind of desperation. I don't think there's anyone in this room, I don't think, who would see that online and say, yeah, I'm just going to go get a prescription for that, subscription for that, and I'm absolutely positively going to cancel my next appointment at Sloan Kettering.
On the second question, I think the American press would certainly welcome any tools, ways to help us understand why people believe stuff and how to get them to believe our
But the
stuff.
American press, one thing needs to be said, does a lousy job about bragging about itself. The people who really...
You do it.
Well, the people who really do the work. There was a television series that I think you started with X or something. It was a television show where people went on who had done great stories in the Times, and the video and the discussion was all about what they did. I remember a video of one of your reporters, driving through, rural Louisiana to go interview someone, and going over with a colleague, okay, how should I ask this question? How should I ask that question?
Right.
Is that an appropriate question? It was how they did it.
Right.
Compare that to how
That's right.
the rest of America sees journalism on television.
Agreed.
It's people
Agreed.
on cable
It's the
television.
transparency issue that
It's
you're
people
talking
on
about.
cable
Agreed.
television basically saying the stuff that their editors made them take out of their story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're just pushing it a little further, or they tweet and say the stuff that their editors wouldn't want them
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Any news operation I run, including NewsGuard, we tweet nothing.
Yeah. So more transparency
I-
about the process. I mean,
agree.
this goes back to what you were saying, Dean. I just want to get a couple other questions in before we go. One over here, and then the lady in yellow.
Okay, so my question really is about the anonymity question and accountability. So when I go to a bank and I have to prove that I'm not a robot and I have to do something about that, why can't we put rules on these sites, these social media sites that say you have to prove who you are so you're not a bot?
Yeah, that's one of the proposals I have in my book, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Exactly that.
You're a smart guy. Okay, then,
Well,
then the
it's a
second-
double-edged sword, because you may remember that a lot of the anonymity stems from situations like in the 50s and 60s, where it used to be that the IRS required people who donated to nonprofits to be listed, and people who were giving money to groups like the NAACP were terrified to do that. So it's not a completely cost-free requirement.
But the second part of the question was really about, I read the New York Times, and I've read it since college and got it in college. But you label things. You label, this is news analysis, this is opinion. Is there a way for us to require, in exchange for the Section 230 protections that these people have, that the posters, rather than the sites, the posters are required to say, this is what this is. This is satire. You remember the Nancy Pelosi drunk deep fake? If you had to post, say, this is news, or this is real, or this is satire, and then there is accountability to the person posting the thing, as opposed to the site itself. So the site has some minimal policing requirement.
I think journalists would find that hard to actually do. I mean, because there is a whole realm of very good satirical journalism, right? I just think it would be hard. Maybe Steve has a different view. I do think we could be better at labeling. I'm not, but to require labels I think that would be pretty tricky.
I also think labels are tricky, and it sort of, as a sort of a black and white view, you can go down sort of a very black and white sort of rabbit hole. Lady in
I'm
yellow.
shocked at the 90%
I would
amount
say
of
90.
the amount of children in college that don't read real news. I'm just shocked, but adults as well. But what I just wanted to say, I don't really have a question, but I think it's a generational thing. I have 30-year-old children. They come up with some weird facts sometimes, and I ask them where they got it from, and I think they just want to think that they know something better than their parents. It's kind of a tribal thing. And my question is, I don't think there's any hope. Do you?
Leo, I think you opened this can of worms. You've got to now answer on hope, and then we have to
you
close
have to put
it.
your hope hat on there.
I'm an optimistic pessimist. The truth is, in some ways, it's terrible to be in journalism right now. And in a lot of ways, there's never been a better time to report a story. The internet is an incredibly powerful tool. You can learn almost anything about a person. OSINT work is incredible. The access to some AI tools which can be used in reporting are incredible. I think there is hope. I think there is a way to reach young people. The problem is, we grew up in a really different way with social media, with COVID, with ways that have, I think, reduced us to a lot of simplistic thinking. And journalism has to play a big role in fixing that. I can't tell you right now how to fix the problem, but I have some hope that we can move past this moment and find a time and place where we restore some trust in our institutions.
Wonderful. I'm going to give the last word to Cece on
Yes.
hope.
So on hope, I will say I have a lot of hope. I'm not bothered at all that people are not reading articles, in the sense that I don't care where they go to get their good information. And so, I mean, for folks out there, I'll just say this. I have become a TikTok convert. I did not grow up with it, but I'm in the sort of middle of all the generations on stage currently. And for as many people on TikTok that are spreading misinformation or trying to sell you some sort of supplement, there are just as entertaining accounts who focus solely on debunking that in an extremely entertaining way. And those accounts also have many, many followers. And so actually, I think this is a battle that we are waging regardless of platform, right? And it's about how are we just talking to people in the way that they are consuming information and actually talk about things these days.
Wonderful. We have to close here. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to the audience.
That was great.